But the thing is, there's certain things that are very evident right now that are clear needs in various industries, right? So whether it's from cancer therapeutics, whether it's related to communications on the front line, right now, Ukraine has that problem today, not 5 years from now.
Welcome to PEP, the Protect Europe podcast, where we interview founders and investors building the technology that protects Europe's values, way of life, and infrastructure. This week, I dive deep with Erik Bhullar, General Partner at BSV Ventures based in the Baltics. You know when you meet a great investor. They are clear, they are concise, they are compelling, and they have a super varied backstory and a competitive streak. Erik is all of these. Join us in this episode to hear why. Erik, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's been a while. We took a while to arrange it because, my life's complicated. Your life is even more complicated. But for those that don't know BSV, what is BSV?
Sure. So BSV actually came previously as Baltic Sandbox Ventures, but we rebranded to BSV. It's not a redundant acronym, BSV Ventures. BSV means Beyond Scientific Validation, which is when so the idea is we invest in deep tech, critical tech, dual use, life sciences, broadly deep tech, and we invest in companies that are post-scientific validation all the way through to early traction, right, and help them scale.
Fantastic. That's a very good pitch. Yeah, I like the fact that it's not a redundant acronym. You've made something. No, that's fine. We did that with one of my companies, actually. One of the companies I invested in, and they had a word and then basically found the letters to make that word work, if that makes sense. Because the first word that they selected, when they Googled it, they realized that it said something really rude in Chinese. Yeah. And something really rude in about 3 other languages. And they were like, okay, better not use that. But anyway, okay. And then how long have you been doing this?
So we launched the fund in 2023. So that's when we started our pre-seed investing, but we closed our full fund, the seed, in 2024 when we started our seed investments, basically. So pre-seed and seed stages are where we invest. We started pre-seed earlier, obviously, because it takes time for those companies to mature before we deploy seed capital into those companies.
Okay, and how big's the fund today?
Fund is 15 million total. So backers include the NATO Innovation Fund, Lithuania's ILTE, which for Finnish listeners is like TESI, but for Lithuania, and also various family offices, entrepreneurs, etc., are also invested in our fund as well.
Fantastic. That's great. And look, I think that, again, it's this particular space, if you are talking beyond scientific validation, micro fund 50, perfect size, because not only because you can do a 10x return or a whatever X return and it looks really good, but also because it's the classic constraint that you need to not write a big check. You don't want to over-capitalize these companies, nor do you want to under-capitalize at this stage. Look,
your fund size is your business model to a large extent, and even though we do relatively small checks, that being said, we lead pretty much 90+% of the time, even with small checks, because when we say we lead, it's not the largest check, it's because we do the level of diligence that a lead investor would do. It's our first fund also as GPs. So for us also, we wanted to do something where we knew we could stay nimble and be selective to the top opportunities that we see. So within this fund, for example, we don't invest in competing companies. We're not broadly indexing across a thematic space. We're concentrating into companies where we see real potential. We have a broader pre-seed funnel that then goes heavier into seed, and then we pro-rata in the top companies into the A's. So.
Oh, look, I completely agree. I do love it when VCs in the olden day, we never compete in competing deals. And then you just look at investments in AI today. They're all in it. Well, sorry. Yeah. I love OpenAI, but I'll also invest in Anthropic and I'll invest in Grok and I'll invest in this and I'll invest in that. And this person for OpenAI has bought out another company. I'll invest in that as well. That the theme has definitely shifted from the competing to get in everything, index the whole lot.
I can understand the wisdom of indexing when you have a large enough fund size and you have no choice but to thematically index and then concentrate into the winners. I understand that and it makes sense if you're a huge fund. But as a micro fund we have the luxury of picking, and being a bit selective, and we'll live or die by our selection, but I think we're doing okay. So we'll see. It's still very early.
Absolutely. And I think that, this is where, you look at certain funds, General Catalyst and others, they've gone on steroids, right? But interestingly enough, they've also gone on steroids, but they've also said, okay, this is going to be the winner in America. Let's back them. This is the winner in Europe. They're going to be different. Let's
They
back
did
them.
in
And maybe even this is the winner in India, Southeast Asia. You know, sorry, that company isn't going to translate into Europe and isn't going to translate into the US. Let's back them as well. So I can definitely see that strategy. Okay. And then just out of interest, so what were you doing before this?
Sure. So, I mean, I'll give you a short version of a very long story. Malaysian born, British education, Australian national living in Estonia. Engineering.
There's a much better story to tell out of that.
Yeah.
Come on.
Dropout. So I was into mechatronics and computer science, but dropped out, worked in the world of finance, primarily in Australia, moved to Europe into tech. Last job, let's say normal job, was a commercial director at a listed company on the London Stock Exchange. And I was doing commercial sales, large scale tech, complex tech sales, basically. So €1 million plus deals. And then essentially left corporate life and moved into the startup space. I've been a founder, did a minor exit, and then basically decided that, focusing on deep tech VC while becoming a dad is probably the way to go before, instead of, doing the founder life thing, decide to live vicariously through the founders I can support and back who are doing the things that change the world. And, I'm very passionate about science and technology. I think, in a different life, I would have pursued that completely. But now I can back the teams who are building the future and also help them build the bridges between business and technology. You have a lot of science and engineering talent in Europe, but they're not, business professionals the way you would see in, let's say, stateside. That being said, they're smart people and they just need to understand the language of business. So a lot of what we do in the fund, we don't just invest money, we also help them understand the language of business so they can really think commercially and understand what it means to bring this to the world and to the market, to have the impact they want to have.
Oh, look, and I hear you. And again, I think it's a kind of an old trope that basically, I want an easier life, I'll become an investor. Like the best investors I know work harder than the best founders I know, right?
I would be back in corporate.
Exactly. Right. So the people that I know that are striving to be exceptional, regardless of whether they're founding companies or, as you are, founding a fund and investing in companies, you're still striving for excellence, right? That bit, sadly, or the work-life balance isn't much better for anybody on that particular basis. Even if
I was just to your point, Colin. I was joking with my co-founder, one of the partners of the fund, Andra, who also is one of the founding partners like myself and Andrew. And we were joking about this because we're saying, look, if we wanted an easier life, we would probably have just started a startup together, because now we have 41 companies in BSV that we work across, 90 plus individuals in the founding or executive teams, right? We're busy and there's always something going on. And thankfully, we think from a relational perspective, we're thankful, but at the same time, from a workload perspective, maybe not as much. We get the 2 a.m. call when the founder's like, hey, what am I doing with my life? Like, all the way through to like, hey, we have this strategic deal happening and we need support with, closing them. And there's some complexity to it and we have no idea how to handle. So we do a lot of things.
Look, I think, again, we don't want to complain because it's a great life, but I do think there is a privilege. Like you have to earn being that first call.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that isn't just the money that you put into the company. Right. They got it because no disrespect. They don't call you just because of the money. They call you because you can help them. And if they don't believe you can help them, they're not going to call. Like it's like I'm in a police cell. I've got one phone call. Who am I calling? The guy who's not that helpful, or the guy who's not going to even pick up. Right? Or am I actually calling the one who effectively is going to try and get me out of this existential opportunity / crisis? And I think, the best investors because they are the people that the founders go to celebrate. And because something really bad has happened.
Crisis.
Yeah. And it's the same person. Right? It's the same person because they want to celebrate with them and they also want them to get them out of the shit.
Exactly.
Super interesting. Okay. And then let's look at some of the themes that you guys are investing in at the moment. And again, I'm really interested because you've made some really nice picks recently. What are the themes? And then what did you see in some of those companies that you picked?
Well, I mean, the theme, like I said earlier, it's deep tech. Primarily focus on critical and strategic tech. What do we mean by that? So deep tech means companies with a fundamental scientific and R&D based edge or advantage, right? That's a mouthful, but fundamentally it's the stuff that changes the world. Yes, bits too, but also atoms. So like more than half our portfolio is even hardware. So, or has hardware components, hardware and software combined, whether that's life sciences for health security, whether that's energy, new types of solutions to stabilize or support the grid, all the way through to cancer therapies, drones, mesh communication, secure communications. It's a pretty broad set, but the main idea is if there's a fundamental scientific and R&D advantage, and it can disrupt an industry in a meaningful enough way, essentially they're doing things faster, cheaper, better than everybody else, and they have ideally patents or some strong advanced trade secret, hard to replicate, then that's the type of stuff we like to look at. And they have a venture opportunity, of course.
Of course. And look, I remember back in the day, I spent some time in Harvard MIT circles, and I met with, I think it was called The Engine. Yeah, which was basically MIT venture capital. And what they were trying to do at the time, and this is going back 10 plus years, is back the founders where the deep technology probably wouldn't surface for 7 to 10 years. But they wanted to make sure that the founder was in a good shape by the time they got them, hadn't given up on their research, but that there was a road to breakthrough. Yep. So the question then, not just in terms of the capital side, you can't do this from a micro fund, but how, and it's not the work-life balance question, because that's not where I'm going with this. It's more a question of how do you, when you said teach business, how are you ensuring that you invest in the companies that can navigate that regulatory or not necessarily regulatory, but that minefield towards success, procurement, whatever that happens to me.
Yeah.
Because in defense, that's very different. In energy, that's very different. In lots of other sectors, there's a lot that you wouldn't necessarily know as a GP team, to impart into these founders in this 60 plus, family that you've kind of created for yourself. How do you do that?
I mean, look, to say that, we know everything about the future, I'd be lying, right? But the thing is, there's certain things that are very evident right now that are clear needs in various industries, right? So whether it's from cancer therapeutics, whether it's related to communications on the front line, right now, Ukraine has that problem today, not 5 years from now. And we can also see how in 5 years from now, things could be expanded. So we have certain, analyses that we've done on different industries through our connections network or, LP base or even otherwise corporates that we are connected with and so on. And based on those thematic areas where we see clear need and opportunity, that's what then guides our investing into certain technological areas. Unlike MIT and the example you gave, where they invest in the research, which could be 7 years away, we do beyond scientific validation, which means after the validation has happened. So the breakthroughs happen, but now the scientist needs to put a team around them. They need to productize it. They need to bring it to market, validate where they're going to actually go. One of the problems, for example, Colin, is deep tech is very horizontal, right? If you, let's say, figure out how to analyze visual data faster, cheaper, better than everybody else using AI, you could use that in anything from plant breeding and plant phenotyping to, in defense cases, is this a drone or is this a bird? Yep. Or, there's so many applications. So you still need to decide, where do I focus on? What's the highest premium value use case of my technology or insight of innovation? And you'll find sometimes researchers or scientists have tried to solve a problem in a certain domain space, and that domain space that they are solving it in has application beyond, but they haven't maybe imagined that, right? So a lot of the work we do with them when we look at this science that actually is, whatever the problem may be, we try to also understand where other applications this could apply. And then, like I said, we don't try to make scientists into business people. We're not trying to turn them from engineers into Elon Musks necessarily. We hope to make them as rich, because obviously that, in our benefit, but also to have the impact. But we give them the language of business, Colin. So the idea is that a lot of the time, scientists and business people, technologists and business people are not speaking the same language. They might speak the same English, for example, but they don't necessarily understand where the other is coming from. So we try to ensure that they are able to traverse the business conversation and then go back into whatever their domain may be. Often it is scientific teams, but having the language is so critical to making good strategic decisions. And that's one of the big problems we see in Europe, like the commercial talent and commercial acumen that exists in certain individuals does not tend to extend out into technology understanding. And the technologists don't often understand what are these people talking about when they're talking about a go-to-market strategy versus a business plan. They don't know the difference between those things. And it's like they think financial model and go-to-market strategy is the same thing. It's like, no, these are very different things, because they're scientists and that's what they should be. They're great at what they do. And so the idea of this program that we do when we invest the pre-seed stage is we enable them to build those bridges and deal for any gaps they may have that enable execution.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And I think, this is one of the challenges. It's not that Europe doesn't have the talent.
Mm-hmm.
It may have less talent that have gone through these companies that have scaled, and had to basically scale. But partly that's because America is a great big market and everybody speaks the same language, and America has a general legal structure which allows these companies to scale. But I hear you in terms of effectively helping them translate the language needs. And I think it's also really interesting. It's looking beyond that kind of first act. Your thing does X, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, well, but could it also do Y? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And could it also do Z or whatever the next set of letters in? And I think that's where great investors really play, right? And we just don't.
Importantly, why should you focus on Z, not Y, for example?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Strategy is knowing what you don't do, not just what you are going to do.
Yeah, and it's a huge opportunity cost. But I remember we've just done an episode for the other podcast that I'm hosting called Category Leaders, where we focus on these enduring European companies that have won their category globally, right? And so it's not best in Europe; it's best in the world, based in Europe. And the first company we analyzed was the growth stage investor Bailey Gifford, which, despite the fact that they have 280 billion assets under management and the fact that they've got better returns than Founders Fund and Sequoia, nobody knows they exist, pretty much outside their niche. But one of their key investment things is looking at that. What's the first act? What's the second act? What's the third act? What's the fourth act? And being long-term capital that allows that founder / team, depending on how long the business is, to enable a second, third, or fourth act.
That is exactly our mindset. Like when it comes to this, we ideally like to see companies have a strategy of dominating their customer relationship within their vertical and then thinking about how they innovate or expand to be, in the case of SaaS, for example, in the late stage, you want to see them go multi-product or own the customer use case. In the case of deep tech, it's not unsimilar to that, but they have potentially multi-vertical plays instead of multi-product. That's
And at the moment, just out of interest, obviously you're based in Thailand. Estonia is a hub. It's a very small place if people haven't visited, very beautiful, but effectively a hub around a kind of technology, kind of, that space. Are you seeing enough of kind of the deal flow in the Baltics and the Nordics? Because I think that's also an interesting aspect there around, we kind of like, there's, the population bases aren't big, but there is the question is are the right people founding companies, and are you seeing those companies? Because I think that's also a challenge in Europe, that effectively we tend to live in our country or area boxes.
I mean, look, a lot of the time, there's no shortage of deal flow. I can tell you we've had more than 8,000 applications since we launched in 2023 for funding. Yes, a lot of that is weirdly SaaS companies thinking they're deep tech when they're not, but at least 1,000 of those have been deep tech in some way, shape, or form, and we selected 41, right? Now, some of these applications come from across the EU too, but a lot is within this region. The vast majority is in this region. When we say region, we say around the Baltic Sea region, which is what we focus. So we mean Nordics. We have deals in Sweden. We have deals in Finland. We have deals here in Estonia, in Lithuania, where we're headquartered. We're looking at a couple of Latvian deals, a couple of Polish deals. We also have done deals in Netherlands. We even have one as far as France. So, we can invest anywhere in the EU. We prefer to focus in our region. We're very much Baltic Sea region focused. And obviously that means, Central Eastern Europe, Baltics, and Nordics. But, at the same time, if we have a thesis around a particular space and the company has a significant, let's say, business interest in this region broadly, which is a French deal, then if there's also a local lead, we'll consider thematically if it makes sense. We focus in our region and our zone, and the 40 companies of the 41 are all in this region.
And interestingly, you said something earlier, and I really want to pick it up. The moment you've got a lot more hardware companies in the mix, partly because of the scientific validation. And I think that's fantastic, because I think that one of the challenges, and, let's not the Americans, it's fine. One of the challenges of following the Silicon Valley thing was that basically it's only about software, right? And software can solve all your problems and you don't need anything else, which if you look at American infrastructure, clearly it's wrong. So the question being is at the moment you've managed to basically focus on the hardware. And again, nothing is a pure hardware. So it's hardware, software, AI, everything. Why do you think that we've managed to or why you think you're cultivating that crop of companies, that group of companies? Is it just the scientific framing, or is it something else?
I mean, if you want to make significant impact on an industry where you can make a venture grade type of return, you need to have an edge, right? Every company is looking for an edge over the competition. The companies we invest in that are hardware companies, they have such an edge. So, for example, if you think about deep tech companies, like, I mean, NVIDIA is a hardware company. Let's not forget about that. It's hardware and software, which obviously is a popular example because of the AI space. But there are tons of hardware companies that can make venture grade returns. And the key thing to understand is what is the play that the startup is going after? Are they just like, hey, we figured out this solution, we want to maybe license this out, make a couple of mil, and then go back to research? That's not what we consider venture grade. It's more the types of people who are like, look, if we do this and we combine this with a bunch of stuff, we can actually provide a big proposition in a large enough industry to disrupt or change or transform the way the industry works. Those are the types of hardware plays we go after. So to give you an example, you mentioned in your email to me, Skycorp Technologies, that is one of our investments, right?
Yep.
They're in the drone space. There's so many people investing in drones. It's like an eye roll investment almost.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But at the same time, the reason we did this deal is because of the level of range that they can have and also the play that they're going after. And what Skycorp can do in terms of the range that their drones can cover is much beyond what you see here, and is completely European supply chain, right? So this is part of the reason. If we want to be able to do things from proper ISR, which is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, all the way through to demining Ukraine, where you want certain payloads on the drones that can scan the ground and tell you down to 30 centimeters below the depth of the soil. So I don't just mean, for example, hyperspectral that can tell you a couple of centimeters, and if there's grass foliage, you can't see what's below. I mean, like, really seeing where the landmines are, to the point where you don't, not just able to tell if the bomb is exploded or not, but also what the pigmentation of the paint is on the plastic explosive, right? You need drones like this that can cover large swaths of land and scan that and be able to help Ukraine. So that's one example. And these drones, not just for surveying and so on, but also infrastructure monitoring in high wind situations. There's devil in the details that a lot of companies that are saying they can do certain things, when you actually look into the science and tech, and this is why we lead, right? Going back to why we lead deals, is because like, we are able to actually get into those technical details. I have an engineering background, even though I did drop out, like I told you, and we have an expert network in our fund, basically, who are all scientific and engineering talent, whether it's ex-NASA JPL people to roboticists to life science experts, people who've exited life sciences companies, etc. Right? So we rely on a lot of them also for insight, and we do the level of homework to understand, can this company do what they're really saying they can do, or are they just making claims? So,
and look, I think this is super important. I think that was a great example in terms of effectively drone capacity in the sky, rather than very short battery, can't do much, I've done 60 minutes, I'm out, etc. That's not going to cover Ukraine. Ukraine's a big place on that particular aspect. And I do think we all fall in love with what we've grown up with, so if you grew up in the days of Uber and Airbnb marketplaces, and it was all about software plus operation, aggregator, swing hard the business model one way. But then you look at the companies now, and again, Uber, Airbnb, fantastic. But you look at the companies now that are really in that $1 trillion range. They're not CapEx light. Big tech is nowhere near CapEx light these days.
That's right.
But oh my gosh, the infrastructure of what Microsoft spent $1 billion a week on data centers last year build out. Amazon's doing $2 billion a week on data centers build out this year. Nvidia, or if you look at a company like Grok, not the Elon one, the Jonathan Ross one, again, chips plus software, right? It's not one or the other, and their differentiator is really the fact that they are doing something really hard, and actually / you'd have to be mad to do this, and therefore that actually reduces the number of competitors, because not everybody's that mad to be able to basically do a chip play or do this asset play. So I think that's really interesting, that kind of mission plus complexity plus scale. And again, I think capital intensity gets a bad rap. Capital intensity can be good if you have the stack and you can leverage it. Like NVIDIA is the classic example of a massively capital intensive business.
Look, even if you look at Amazon, for example, they also look at vertical integration, and the way they design their businesses. Every new component that we add to our stack has to be a business in its own right that is profitable, and also, or could be profitable. depending on how they want to play it. And so it's the same thing with deep tech. Like if you have an edge in an area, then you can press that edge either by serving a customer or go further up the stack to the end customer. Instead of only being plumbing, you can become the whole house, for example.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. And look, let's not miss the opportunity to briefly talk about Ukraine, because
Sure.
So how do you guys then support Ukraine? Because for me, Ukraine isn't just a country fighting an existential war. That's obvious. But this is also a war that is across the whole of Europe, right? Now, it's hot in Ukraine today, but then regardless of when this episode comes out, there'll have been a drone flyby in Copenhagen. There'll be an undersea cable cut. There'll have been something happen on the news yesterday. There'll be a Polish border closed to Chinese trains. Like, this is, to me, this is the place where decades are happening in weeks, right? So whatever news story is happening, it's involving. And sadly, we're all at war with Russia, whether we like it or not, on this particular basis. So how do you help the Ukraine-Europe type thing? Where do you guys go with that?
So specifically when it comes to Ukraine, obviously we are very linked to Ukraine in some ways here in the Baltics, because we see a lot of Ukrainians also coming into this region. Aside from Poland, also the Baltics have received a lot of Ukrainians, and we're also on the border. So we have the same neighbor and the same potential challenges there. Not only that, when you think about European security, for example, it's not just about missiles, right? Security includes your grandmother getting radiotherapy in time. It includes your bank not going down when there's a cyber attack. It includes children not being brainwashed by disinformation. And we have investments solving those problems too, right? How we help Ukraine specifically, there are companies in our portfolio that are providing technologies and solutions that help with Ukraine. Multiple of them, for example, Wayron in Estonia that you also asked about earlier, they are providing communication technology that can work in environments even with jamming, for example, going on, where others communication solutions fail, they can still keep things running. So there's a lot of companies and technologies that we've invested in that are enabling and supporting the front. We also recently did an investment in a company for early warning systems in case drones or missiles are coming into Ukraine, so they can early warn response teams to be able to deal with those threats. There's certain other things also that we've invested in that are maybe more hush-hush for now, but we can talk about in detail.
But just the early warning system one, because I didn't know that. So are you able to talk about that one?
Briefly, I can talk about some things, yes.
Okay, go on then. Tell us about it. Does it have a name, this company?
Yes, the company is called Zvuk, and the team is also on the front lines.
Okay.
It is public information that they have acoustic sensors, essentially, to be able to detect threats and targets. So that much I can tell you.
Okay, look, it sounds great. Look, I think Wayren is another one that you
Yes.
mentioned earlier. And look, I met those guys when I came over to Tallinn. I was super impressed.
Amazing team.
Yeah, look, and again, I think this speaks to the talent question and the motivation question. So for those who aren't familiar with Wayren, this is a Tallinn-based company that effectively does battlefield communications. And when we say battlefield, we basically mean any environment where effectively there is a security layer that you need to coordinate with, whether that's troops, sadly, in Washington or some random city in America that Trump sent in, or anything else. And I think what I hadn't appreciated until I met the guys is obviously they're all Estonian military background. So they did their national service type thing and stuck around. Then a bunch of them went off to work at Microsoft and actually learned how to build kind of enterprise tech, which also I love, because they kind of, Microsoft has a great profile in that particular space. And then they built effectively their MVP for their own military, because they solved the problem around latency on the battlefield. And this kind of jamming, anti-jamming thing that's going on, communications not coming through and triaged, et cetera, et cetera. And then they're highly motivated to get this out the door. This isn't an academic exercise. There was a lot of stuff that they were having to do, which was very complicated in terms of the protocols that they used, but also in terms of working with a local hardware provider to make sure that their stuff actually didn't fall apart as soon as it left the lab. So I thought that was a really good example.
I can add a little bit to that just to clarify as well. They have a bit of their own hardware, so it's a hardware and software company. And one of the problems in whether it's battlefield environments or even underground mines is you lose a lot of the data that is being transmitted. Everyone is excited and hyped about 5G, 6G, or whatever. But the problem is the higher the Gs you kind of go into, you get higher bandwidth and throughput, but you lose range, for example, sometimes. And also, if you have jamming, you lose a lot of the data that is being sent. So you have to resend a lot of data, and that just clogs the whole pipeline. basically, right? That's one way to think about it. And so they basically solved that problem without going into technical detail intentionally. But they can handle situations where no other solution would actually work. And so we're very excited about supporting them. And, like I said, it's even mining situations, maritime, like remote environments, whether it's, search and rescue in the middle of Australia, for example, where you don't have sat links, and also obviously on the battlefield. So, yeah.
No, look, I think again, all these capabilities Europe/the world needs. So again, I'm pretty simple on the business side, which is always like, how do we ensure that we build capabilities that Europe/the biggest possible market actually needs? And I think what they're doing there is not just critical communications in that particular sense, but it has that widespread appeal outside. Brilliant. Fun.
Like, like in an attack situation, communication networks and communication systems are the first thing you want to take down, right? So the person you're attacking can't communicate. If Wayron technology is deployed across the alliance, then you could try, but you won't be very successful.
Yeah, very, very good. No, it's fair. Look, fantastic. Really like that company. And again, great to see that quality of talent, mixture of young, deeply scientific, military capability, Microsoft big tech capability, deploying their skills in a format and moving quickly. Yeah, great example on that particular side. Okay, so talking of other great examples, who do you admire in this space? Who is, we've shouted out to Wayron, but I've already recorded an episode with them. So let's try and find someone else. And it could be an investor. It doesn't have to be a founder, because obviously that's like picking your favorite child. No parent or wannabe parent has favorite children. So, who else out there is doing a great job?
Honestly, I think if you look at the people in Europe who are all the scientific and engineering talent that we have, I wouldn't say a specific individual, but all scientific and engineering talent in Europe who are called to something greater than simply sitting in a lab, but to actually make an impact on the world. Those people who are solving the problems that you and I can't imagine exist, and they come to us when they need funding, and we end up learning so much every time we interact with a new team, whether or not we invest. The fact that they are actually earnestly applying those amazing skills that they have to, whether it's making an impact in cancer therapeutics or a battlefield frontline, those are the people I really admire the most. And I think, if we have more support and more infrastructure to enable those people to bring that to the world, I mean, imagine the number of Einstein's equivalents we've lost just because we don't understand what they're up to, aren't investing effectively into them because nobody really is willing to, go after the scientific validation. Everyone wants to invest after you've already made revenue. But it's like, you won't get deal flow. It's so funny because I hear sometimes VCs saying, "Oh, we don't have enough deal flow." I'm like, yeah, the reason you don't have deal flow is because you can't see them before they have revenue, so they languish before the opportunity happens. That's our opportunity as an early stage fund, because that's where we specialize. We specialize in pre-seed and seed. We will always stay true to our roots, no matter how big we get, because this is the zone at which you go from, early potential to actually manifesting that, and it's heavy lifting, and that's where we focus on, really helping those founders at the early stage of the climb so they can build momentum, and then once they have that, then they're off to the races.
I think that's without naming individuals, you've named a persona, right? And I think the persona is very valuable. And I remember Megan, myself, my daughter, we went and visited one of the cancer labs here at the University of Helsinki. And this was a founder reached out to a friend, and the friend reached out to me, and Megan and I went for a trip to this cancer lab. And we sat there like 5 o'clock on a Friday night and basically sat there and just talked about the sort of businesses they were wanting to evolve out of this particular laboratory. So this was all about, in this case, the problem they'd initially started solving was around the challenge around vaccinations staying in cold storage during transportation, right? So expensive to produce, more expensive to get there. Basically, a lot of stuff gets broken and dies en route. So that was the first thing that they'd started, and they'd spun that out as a separate company. And then it was also a question around producing individual cancer vaccines. And we were like, individual cancer vaccines? Talk me through. Megan's very good on genetics. So we then spent like an hour and a half talking about how does the technology work, right? So they then spent an hour and a half telling us how the technology works. And we were like, okay, I got it. And this was really good. really good brain upgrade. And we went, okay, now explain what your business plan is. And they like, and there was nothing. And I said, okay, right. You've been very kind and shared how the technology works. Let us be kind and tell you how the business, right. This is what you need to do. So
Amazing.
this is so this is the thing that we find very comfortable. It's our comfort zone. I'll explain how a business works. I'll explain how this bit, and this is how you do this and this and this and this. And they were like, oh my God, that sounds so interesting. I never heard of it before. And they just spent an hour and a half doing exactly the same thing for us. And I think, I completely second what you say. Again, great investors go and meet those founders before their revenue, et cetera, et cetera. They go on those hunches. They chase those opportunities. And again, that's the persona that you're targeting. So hopefully we'll reach a few more of these people and they will beat a path to your door. and you'll educate them and they'll educate you. And whether you invest or not, I still think it's a hugely positive experience for both parties.
I mean, look, I fully agree with that. And by the way, if that team is raising, feel free to find us.
I was going to say, I will send them through your way. Don't worry.
But just to your point, look, health security is national security. Financial independence is national security. Trust in the institutions we have is part of national security, right? And, we can't build resilience unless we make sure that all the systems that we rely on as a society, whether it's, the energy system, whether it's, the software that keep things running in the background and the hardware and the infrastructure, if we don't invest in that and understand the things that we need to do to upgrade that and to keep competitive, that we're basically sitting ducks otherwise. So I think it's important.
Oh, look, I completely agree. And again, it was very interesting, just referencing the Bailey Gifford guys for a second. Mm-hmm. What they did was basically focus on, okay, we invest in category leading companies. That's their whole thing. And then we hold them long term and we make sure they do their first, second, third. It's a
brilliant strategy.
That's fine, right? But they had to do a change to the way they did things because they said, look, if we don't have security, this category leading company is not going anywhere. Like NVIDIA, all fantastic. But if you take out the fabs, if you take out the systems and the algorithms, this company's gone. So ironically, it's not that they scrapped ESG. They just put the silent letter, which would always been there, the S beforehand, security. It'd always been silent because it was peace in Europe, blah, blah, blah. Sure. We weren't at war. And they just said, well, we just got to put that back in. So security comes first. And then we can do everything else. If we've got security, we can invest in category leading companies, which means we have to invest in some companies like Tekava, our NATO investment fund joint in their Series B. We have to invest in that first because there won't be security. And I think that framing really helped me to think about that again. Through investing in security and through investing in this opportunity, we can actually increase capitalism, solve more problems, make sure these companies can have their impact on the world. And if we don't invest enough in this particular space, then actually we just limit ourselves. You're not going to get your flying card because you didn't do this. Fantastic. Well, look, Erik, you've been a star. You have been amazing. It's been so good to have you on the podcast.
Appreciate it.
I will send more deal flow through to you as
Feel free to.
I promise on that particular side. And
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again, Colin. And if any founder listening to this is looking to power their deep tech venture, BSV.Ventures, you don't need a warm referral to reach out to us. Just fill the form.
That is exactly what people need to know.
Perfect.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. To make sure you catch us again, please follow us on your favorite podcasting platform.